The prince challenged the maid to a race to mock her, but she rode like an Amazon. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The South Terrace drowsed under spring light, the kind that softened marble and turned every leaf a different green. Fountains whispered beyond the orangery. Laughter rose in tidy bursts from the lawn, that precise, gilded kind of laughter people acquire when they know they are being watched. After the formal luncheon, the court spilled out to idle, to be seen idling. The prince tried to idle with them. He could not. The day itched. He had thrown fencing gear aside only an hour earlier. The quickness of the blade still simmered in his wrist. Attention drifted along his shoulders like warm rain. He smiled. He let it slip off. He smiled again. Nothing bit. On the lower path, a groom led out a chestnut hunter to stretch the animal's legs. The prince watched its ears flick toward a stable boy, watched the boy murmur something, and saw the groom's grin flash at the insolence. That was something. Insolence always roused the court. "Sport," he said, easy and dry, to no one in particular, and everyone at once. "We need a bit of air." Heads turned. The master of the horse, neat as a pin in his livery, stepped forward at once. He bowed a fraction, measuring the mood the way a man measures a horse's balance before asking for more pace. "Your Highness has but to command." The prince walked to the gravel ring that circled the orangery lawn. He traced it with his boot heel, as if sketching a figure with a blade. A course, a straight to that urn, a tight curve round the yew arbor, back along the balustrade. A return worth watching. A ripple of interest. The court rearranged itself without being told. Fans opening, gentlemen strolling with practiced indifference toward the edge of the gravel, ladies lifting their hems. The master of the horse signaled. 2 grooms trotted out the chestnut hunter and a tall dapple-gray mare used for morning exercise. The mare blew softly, eyes like river stones, and tossed her head toward the stable boy who had the leading rein. The boy, brimming with the day's small courage, said too much aloud. "Even a maid could sit her, she's that sweet," he said, and then checked himself, too late. It ran like lightning through dry grass. The prince turned his head slowly, smiling as if he had not heard, which showed everyone that he had. In 3 steps, the joke that would have died in the dust was transformed into something with teeth. He glanced across the terrace to the line of servants in the shade. Sun flashed on silver canisters. Linen clean and white as new bone. One face held stillness instead of slack compliance, and because she did not drop her eyes at the speed of habit, his attention caught. "You!" he called, pointing with the lift of his chin rather than a finger, the sort of command that feels like an invitation until it lands. "Come have your bit of air." A murmur, not about the maid, about him, the way he had said it. He heard it and let it lie. The master of the horse cleared his throat with authority. "Your Highness, the physician should speak." The court physician, summoned by a look and a nod, came forward at once, pale wig, steady mouth. "If there is to be speed, let it be tempered. The stones at the corner of the yew are loose. I require prudence." "I always obey physicians," the prince said, which was true in public and almost true in private. He gestured. "Mark it, then." The senior equerry moved, efficient and silent. He set a stake at the first straight, another by the final balustrade, and tied a length of blue silk ribbon between them. He tested the tension and adjusted the angle so that a nose could break it without pulling the stake from the soil. The ribbon quivered in the light breeze, a thin vein above the gravel. The prince's chestnut shook as the groom mounted. He checked the saddle himself, not because he distrusted anyone, but because 100 eyes asked him to be perfect. He placed his boot in the stirrup and swung up as if gravity had made a private arrangement with his body. The horse gathered under him and settled with the comfort of old habit. The maid stepped from the shade then, through the quiet hole the crowd made inside itself. She wasn't shunted forward. She didn't hurry. She was young, but not so young that the court could decide she did not know better. He felt a notch of surprise, the the pure sort that slides cleanly into the chest. It annoyed him that it pleased him. He had expected a tremble, a giggle, a glance at her fellows for permission. He saw none of that. He saw the particular care with which she looked at the mare's shoulders, a care that would be invisible to most eyes, and the way her mouth set when she chose to accept. "Your Highness," the master of the horse said, low, "safety requires—" "Yes, yes," the prince answered. He did not look away from the maid. "Tell her." "She will not take the mare beyond her ability," the master of the horse said, directing the words to the girl and the court alike. "Any unsafe conduct, and I call the race. We obey the physician's caution. Slow at the U. To finish, break the ribbon. Not before. Are we understood?" The maid nodded once. It was not servile. It was compact. The master of the horse lifted his brows, then turned to check the mare's tack. He tightened the girth a hole, tested the bit, laid his hand flat on the mare's neck. The mare sighed. "Name?" the prince asked, because the court wanted the sound of it to hold on to. "Eleanor," she answered, meeting his gaze briefly, and then looking to the horse again. He let the name roll a moment, like testing the weight of a coin. "Good. Eleanor rides." He moved the hunter to the start. Silence thickened in all the right places. He felt the animal's muscles under his knee, alive, ready. He let his hands chat to the horse through the reins, a conversation of pressure and yield the court could not read. He only half looked at the maid again, yet he saw everything. The way she put her foot to the stirrup, not flat and timid but with the ball of her foot. The way she placed her thigh into the saddle with no clatter or scramble. The way her hands took the reins without gripping. That was not luck. That was practice done out of sight. "Bold," someone said softly. It irked him that he could not tell who. The physician lifted a hand. "Temper," he warned, to no one in particular, to fate. The equerry raised his arm. The blue ribbon trembled in a small gust. The prince felt the court's breath hitch and knew, with a clean clarity that always steadied him, that there would be a story before supper. The equerry's arm dropped. The hunter sprang, as he knew he would. The first stride ate the gravel, the second set the rhythm, the third gave him ground. The laughter turned into shouts as the chestnut shot true down the straight. The prince kept his body still, light in the saddle, giving the horse his head just enough. Air tore past his ears. Gravel spat backward. He tasted the metallic tingle of adrenaline and control. Better. This was better. Half a length ahead, then a hole. The first marble urn flashed by. He leaned into the curve and felt the chestnut's haunches gather, then slide a whisper on the loosened stones. He checked, the tiniest pulse in his fingers. The horse listened, corrected, obeyed. It took a beat, that correction. It cost nothing, he thought, then heard the court exhale, either in relief or hope he could not tell, and realized it had cost him something invisible until counted. He did not look back. He did not need to. He felt the presence behind him like weather. The U-arbor blurred, the curve tightened. The hunter's right fore landed on a patch more polished than it looked. A scatter of stones rolled beneath the hoof. He gathered, kept the lead, rode the check through. Somewhere in that neat movement was a stutter, and in that stutter, space opened. He came out of the curve and asked for more. The chestnut answered with the power he had paid for in sweat and coin. The return stretch ran along the balustrade like a promise. The ribbon glittered at the far end, a vein of blue to be cut. He heard it then. The mare's stride behind him could not be ignored. Growing, lengthening, no frantic clatter, no waste. He did not need to look to know the maid had timing. The thought struck with annoyance and a bright, unexpected pleasure that colored the edges of it. Who taught her that? Where? He pressed. The hunter surged. It would be enough. It had to be. It was very nearly enough. He saw the equerry's shoulder tense with his raised arm. He lowered his hands, freeing the chestnut's neck for the last drive. At the same instant, he felt the mare come out from behind his shoulder like an arrow freed from the hand, clean and low. The finish blossomed like a coin tossed into sun. He leaned and felt the chestnut's nose reach. A fraction. That was all it was. A fraction. The blue ribbon parted on another nose. Silence clapped around him like a cloak. He sat the check with grace. He always did. The chestnut blew hard, steam in the spring air. He slowed, turned the horse, and did not look at anyone until he had his own face in order. It took a breath, then another. The whole court noticed those breaths, and because they noticed, he forced a third into something like indifference. The master of the horse began to applaud, as if he could will sense into the room. A few others followed, and then the sound collapsed into uneasy quiet that felt honest. The prince stroked the chestnut's neck and rode to the side, calm, exact, as if this were the very outcome he had designed to show himself magnanimous. The effort taxed him, and therefore pleased him. He turned the hunter over to the grooms and did not step down until he decided to. When he did, the gravel under his boots held. He could feel eyes sliding off his back the way oil slides off marble. He did not mind being watched. He minded being measured. That was different. Out on the course, the Maid's dapple grey stood with both ears forward, breathing with a deep, sane rhythm. The blue ribbon had snapped and fluttered, and in a twist of chance and wind, a loop of it had caught against the Maid's sleeve where it now hung, like something both gaudy and undeserved, if one were inclined to think so. Enough of the court was inclined. He could hear the first whispers without caring about the words. Words were always the least important part. He looked past them to the way the master of the horse walked to the mare first, not to him, placed a hand on her withers, and nodded. That was honest too. The prince lifted his chin to call for decorum and saw, at the edge of the shifting semicircle that had been the audience, Lady Selwyn watching with an expression she kept for cards and tragedies. He almost smiled, then decided not to. He watched as the grooms brought his horse away by the lower path, watched the master of the horse turn the Maid's mare toward the cool-down, saw the Maid swing a leg over and drop to the gravel with a neatness that did not belong to pure happenstance. Let them whisper, he told himself. Whispering would do what he needed. It would tighten. It would make the room smaller and clearer. The room was already smaller. He walked toward the lower end of the balustrade, toward the knot where the path narrowed and people had to decide if they wanted to meet him or not. He did not decide yet what he wanted from the Maid beyond the vagueness of attention. That could be decided in a breath later. The wind shifted, bringing the orangery sweetness and the cool tang of horses. He breathed both. He did not look back at the blue ribbon, which in any case was not all that had shifted the day. He knew, with the certainty people deny until it is too late to deny it, that nothing purely pleasant would come of this hour. The mare's skin twitched beneath the groom's hand. Eleanor placed her palm on the horse's neck and felt heat and effort under satin hair. The mare had more to give. Eleanor had kept her from giving it. That counted as pride in some mouths. In hers it counted as sense. She let the mare breathe. She let her own pulse slow. Only then did she notice the weight at her throat was wrong. Her fingers went to her kerchief. Thread. Warm skin. Nothing else. The breath she had just taken dissolved into two smaller ones. She kept her face still because stillness was what the palace respected in servants. She looked down at the gravel where hoof and boot had churned it, and saw nothing. The moment threaded past. The grooms began to lead the horses away by the lower path at the master of the horse's order, and she walked with them 3 steps, then stopped. "I'll walk the mare myself," she said, quiet, even. It was not truly a request. She had found that quiet. Even statements gave her a space to act. The master of the horse considered her and the mare and the court's fresh-scraped attention. "Walk her to the ewe and back," he said, "then hand her over." She nodded. She could have bowed and did not. Her hand slid from the mare's neck to the rein. The leather was warm and familiar. She owed her own steadiness to mornings when no one watched, when a lame pony was given into her keeping because no one had time to bother with him, when she learned the way horses breathe if you do not press them when they cannot answer. Those mornings were not icicles like jewels in the court's hair. They were the way you hold on. She led the mare under the trees. Air cooled in the shade. A fallen leaf stuck to the mare's haunch and dropped when she swished her tail. Eleanor followed the shape of memory back to the finish. The equerry had reset the blue stake in its hole. A curl of ribbon lay torn on the gravel, bright as a bruise. She left it. She searched with her eyes rather than her hands, knowing that kneeling on the court's path would make her a picture for someone else's telling. She did not see the locket. She saw the place where it should have fallen. She felt the chain against her skin, the tiny strain where the clasp had caught and then not. She felt the lack like a missing tooth she could not keep her tongue from finding. She led the mare to the ewe and back, the rhythm of hoofs over small stones a count she could bear, and then turned to the master of the horse. "Sir," she began. "Hand her over," he said, kind enough for a man who knew everyone was watching. He did not need her name. He had it. She smoothed the rein into the groom's hand, fingers lingering for a half breath on the mare's soft lips. The mare nudged. A blessing. Eleanor stepped back. The master of the horse nodded to her, quick, almost invisible, and someone might have mistaken it for nothing. It warmed her anyway. She took 2 steps along the line of the balustrade and then slipped to the edge, where the shadow caught her and made the court less visible to itself. The gardener's gravel left dust on the hem of her skirt. She moved it with a thoughtless swipe and looked again where the ribbon had snapped. If the locket had fallen, it would have slipped toward the slight dip where the path meets the lawn. An old habit of ordering linens and finding dropped pins told her where small things roll. She followed the thought and found more gravel. The locket was not there. What had she expected? That a trinket could fall in front of an entire court and be ignored? That the morning's luck would stretch to cover afternoon? A shadow crossed the light on the path. She bent at the same moment it bent. The gloved toe of a shoe brushed a glint of silver farther from the public eye. Eleanor's palm hovered over the place where it should have met her locket. It met air. By the time she lifted her eyes, the gloved hand had already closed on the oval. The glove was dove gray, not white. The seams were perfect. The wrist bone wore a narrow bracelet of gold thin enough to be an afterthought. In a house like this, bracelets said more than mouths. The glove turned the locket over. The gloved thumb stroked the surface as if cleaning away dust that would dare to collect on it. The motion revealed the faint engraving. An ash leaf above a chevron so narrow it could be mistaken for a scratch. The hand belonged to Lady Selwyn. Eleanor did not need to look higher than the hand to know it. Everyone knew her hands. They held cards and the edges of letters and small things that cost other people dear. The court made space for her the way water makes space for a knife. Lady Selwyn did not look at Eleanor. She did not look at the prince. She did not look at anyone. Her eyes followed the locket, not the room. It was a sort of arrogance that had nothing to do with titles and everything to do with certainty. She slipped the locket into her reticule with the same measured neatness with which she arranged her ribbons at table. Eleanor's breath did not change. There were other things that did. The day narrowed. The blue ribbon hung from her sleeve, light against her skin. She considered taking it off. She did not. The tiny defiance of leaving it there would not help her, but it felt like the only honest thing when everything else was turning into polite forms. The master of the horse raised his voice just enough. "Walk them away by the lower path," he called to the grooms. "Let them blow. No fuss." The mare's hoofbeats receded. The court's voices rearranged themselves into a pattern that sounded like civility and was nothing of the sort. Eleanor could feel eyes alighting on her and skittering away as if her skin had suddenly grown hot. She kept her head level and her hands folded. Her throat felt naked. The prince stood 10 paces off, not looking at her, and not looking. His pose had been recalibrated. That was the right word. He had put the weight of the moment into his spine and made it look like ease. When he finally did let his eyes fasten on her, It was with a steadiness that unspooled into something else the longer it held. He saw the ribbon on her sleeve, and because he saw it, the court saw it. He saw, too, that she reached, almost idly, for the place where a locket ought to have hung, and found nothing. He watched the small absence settle in. He did not move. The master of the horse, as if restoring a picture crooked on the wall, lifted a hand and told the nearest lackey to fetch water. The physician adjusted his cuffs and spoke to a person who needed no advice. The equerry fiddled with the stake as if the angle of a blue ribbon had ever mattered to history. Through all of it, Lady Selwyn walked at a measured pace, as if the gravel deserved her care. She did not tighten her reticule's drawstring. She did not touch it at all. Eleanor let herself look at Lady Selwyn's shoulder for one breath, and then at the hand with the glove whose seams she could map in the dark. That was not wise, but wisdom had not been enough to keep a locket on a chain. She took a step toward the place where she could have met Lady Selwyn's gaze and then, remembering what rooms do to people like her when they do not take care, bent instead to retrieve the scrap of ribbon on the ground. It came up bright between her fingers. She looped it round her wrist, beside the loop that had caught itself, because she needed to do something with her hands that looked like nothing. Sun moved on the lawn. The shadows edged toward evening. The court began to disperse in pairs and trios that would arrange their talk to suit their supper. Eleanor could feel, in the way people turned their bodies, in the way they quoted each other's expressions, that the race was already a story someone else owned. The chestnut's shoes rang once on the lower path, a small sound that cut more cleanly than it should have. She waited for a glance, a signal, an instruction. The master of the horse gave her none and all mercy at once by saying nothing more. The prince, whose eyes had paused on her and then resumed their life as instruments of rule, pivoted as if to leave, then did not. Lady Selwyn paused long enough at the yews shade to examine the tip of her glove for dust that was not there. Eleanor's chain lay cool against her skin, empty, precise, accusing. Around her, the air felt newly scarce. The court loved scarcity. It made everything taste more expensive. She did not know how to leave. She did not know how to stay. She did what people like her have always done when those who own the room change the rules mid-breath. She made herself small in all the ways that mattered to the room, and large in all the ways that mattered to herself, and she waited for the moment to declare itself. The prince drew a breath that changed nothing and everything at once. Lady Selwyn turned toward the colonnade with Eleanor's locket hidden in her reticule, and the wide, amused day abruptly became a narrow, dangerous night. The prince stood very still and let the silence shape around him. He felt it, the new contour of the afternoon, the way attention changed temperature after a reversal. It stung and it steadied him in the same instant. He had been trained for rooms like this, for missteps turned into posture, for posture turned into story. "Inspect the corner," he said quietly, as if discussing nothing more than hedges. "The yews, stones. They'll say the path was at fault." The master of the horse inclined his head. "At once, Your Highness." Two grooms jogged to the turn and scuffed their boots into the loosened gravel, then knelt to lift a handful and let it pour through their fingers. The act was theater for the physician, for the equerry, for the glances that needed a direction. It was also proper care of the course, which mattered to the master of the horse no matter who watched. The physician drifted near, measured concern shaped like an apology. "Fortunate, the check you took." "I am always fortunate," the prince said, without looking at the man. "It is half my occupation." The equerry returned the blue ribbon to its place with a new knot. The end fluttered as if it had opinions. The prince's eyes went there and then away toward the colonnade, where servants arranged themselves into usefulness and invisibility. He saw the maid step aside, saw her fingers find the hollow at her throat, saw them close on air. It snared his attention again, that small absence, because something was always being taken in rooms like these, and most of the time the room pretended it hadn't noticed. "Shall I declare the mare a risk for afternoon sport?" the master of the horse asked low. following the line of caution that would let the court pack the moment back into etiquette. "No," the prince said. She was well chosen for what she did. There was a risk in that answer. He let it sit between them. The master of the horse absorbed it and said nothing more. Microhooks spun out around him without effort. The court loved implication. They could make a day last a month in their telling. He gave them a new thread. "Have the grooms cool both," he said. "Lower path. Avoid the noise." The master of the horse signaled. Handlers moved, practiced as water. The chestnut, all sinew and pride, walked with its ears half back, listening for the permission he would not give it again today. The dapple-gray mare tipped an ear toward the maid as if speaking. He saw her palm slide one last time over the horse's neck. He hated that he liked seeing it. "You require anything more of the afternoon, sir?" the physician asked, anxious to smooth what could not be smoothed. "I require supper," the prince said, and smiled in a way that made the suggestion harmless. "And something other than this to discuss." He turned slightly and caught Lady Selwyn's profile, the nonchalant exactness with which she held her reticule. His gaze touched it, moved on, returned for a half-breath that cost him more than it showed. She had her prize, whatever she imagined it to be. That, too, would have to be managed. He stepped back from the center of the lawn with a measured ease that told everyone decorum had returned, because he had decided it had. The trick, always, was to carry humiliation like a glass of water, level, without spilling, without clenching. As he reached the edge of the gravel, a junior understeward slid near with a bow that was almost a curtsy. "Your Highness, a suggestion from the Lord Chamberlain. The evening's reception might benefit from formality." "Will it?" the prince said. The question did not require an answer, only obedience. "You may tell him I welcome order." He watched the message leave the garden in the understeward's hands, a thin current joining larger ones moving invisibly through the house. He let himself look back once at the blue ribbon on the maid's sleeve. It was nothing. It was something. He walked away, as if it were nothing. Eleanor kept to the column's shadow and felt the ring of absence harden into sense. The court moved past in eddies. She stood still and did not snag anyone's eye. That was a skill, too. She measured everything the palace measured: posture, angles, the width of a smile. And then she measured what the palace never counted: breath, the feel of ground through thin leather soles, the scrape of linen on skin when your heart beat faster than was safe. She would have liked to kneel and comb the gravel with her hands. She had done more foolish things for less. She did not. The new rule of the hour: anything you touch becomes an accusation. "Back to your post," a voice said behind her, clipped but not unkind, the senior housemaid. "There is linen to change before the Queen's rest." Eleanor inclined her head and let her eyes say what her mouth could not say here. "Please. One moment." The housemaid saw and answered with a flick of her fingers toward the path. Nothing more. It was the sort of mercy that looks like nothing when written down and feels like a rope thrown to a swimmer. Eleanor moved along the servants' walk that skirted the orangery, keeping close to the hedge, letting the shade cover the flush in her cheeks. The air cooled as the stones gave way to flag. In the scullery passage, the smells reverted to the house's true language: starch, soap, warmed pewter, onion, beeswax. "Did you see?" a kitchen maid whispered as Eleanor passed, eyes bright with borrowed danger. "They say you flew. They say he turned pale." "I do not discuss," Eleanor replied, and kept walking. Her voice was even because evenness was armor. She reached the Queen's floor by the back stairs, hands clean and steady by the time she entered the antechamber. The supervisor eyed her wrists in a way that meant the blue ribbon had become an offense by existing. "What is that?" the woman said without rising above civility. "A scrap," Eleanor said. "I'll remove it." "Do," the supervisor said. "Quickly. We do not carry the lawn upstairs." Eleanor untied the loop with careful fingers and, because superstition is a kind of courage when you have nothing else, slipped it beneath the edge of her sleeve instead of letting it fall. Then she took up the work, freshening flowers, shaking out clean linen to catch light, aligning porcelain in a line so straight it calmed something raw inside her. She moved in the old rhythm, the one that belonged to mornings when the palace had not yet noticed her, when tasks were tasks and not messages. She almost found a place for her breath when a page arrived, soft-shoed, with a stiff square of paper pinched between two fingers. "For Eleanor," he said, as if the name were a question. The supervisor took it and turned it over, reading the seal with her eyes before she broke it with her thumb. She passed it to Eleanor without letting their hands touch. "The Lord Chamberlain requires a brief accounting of the afternoon's diversion," she said. "You will present yourself when called." Eleanor read the neat lines. The language contained neither threat nor kindness. It was a request that was not a request. "Yes," she said. The page lingered with the comfort of someone who has no stake in the outcome. "There may be another," he said idly. "They're sending in every direction." She nodded and put the note away where she kept her pins. Her heart, obedient to habit, slowed enough for her to notice it. She set a vase on a table. She arranged 6 stems, not 7. The second note arrived before she had finished the flowers. Different seal. The master of the horse this time, requesting the name of the groom who attacked the mare and the time at which she was brought out. It asked for nothing more, and said much. That fault was being measured. That blame would find a level. The supervisor looked uncomfortable when she handed it over. "Answer only what is asked," she advised. "Nothing else." "I know the groom," Eleanor said. "I will give his name." "Choose your words," the supervisor said. "Words cost." "I have little to spend," Eleanor said, and set the vase down. In the scullery passage again, they had already built a different story. It always happened fast. A laundress folded a sheet and said, "She taunted him, they say." A footman polishing a candlestick said, "He planned it to be generous at the end." A housemaid younger than Eleanor said nothing and watched her as if watching were work. Eleanor delivered her answers where she was told to deliver them, aligned her face to the style of the house, and tried once more to count the breaths that made up an hour. It could have unspooled into evening like any other. It did not. Under the laurel walk, Lady Selwyn paced as if the leaves themselves were listening. She had sent the other women on, with a murmur about the heat and the glare and a headache that wasn't. The space was private by the oldest method, by the manner in which she possessed it. The clerk the Lord Chamberlain used for errands came to her at once, hat in hand, back at the angle acquired by men who spend their lives at the edges of rooms. He was one of those agreeable creatures who knew where paper lived and how to coax it into speech. "You will do something useful," Lady Selwyn said. She did not waste his time with prefaces. In the household records there is a catalogue of minor arms, a miscellany no one reads except men like you and ladies like me require it. You will find an ash leaf and tell me the names it has adorned. The engraving is very faint. It may be mistaken for a common leaf. It is not. The clerk nodded as if she had asked him whether the day was fine. "Yes, my lady." "You will also tell me," she added, pacing one measured length of gravel and back, "if any of those names have been extinguished in the last generation in such a way as to leave questions. We do not like questions. No, my lady. And you will not say my name to anyone while your hands are on those books, or after." He had the sense to look surprised by the implication. "My lady, I never speak." "Of course you do," she said lightly. "Only not when it matters. Go." He went, at a brisk pace that pretended to be casual. She stood, turned the locket over in her reticule without looking at it, and watched the court ripple with the aftershocks of the afternoon. She did not bother with indignation for the prince's sake or the maid's. Indignation did not pay. But she did care for stability. The court in chaos meant the wrong people spoke too loudly. The prince passed within sight, receiving a series of bows like a man walking through soft rain. Lady Selwyn let her lips part in a polite smile that did not warm at all. He did not meet her eyes. Good. She preferred a man who chose his vantage points. The clerk returned sooner than most would manage. That was why she used him. He had a paper folded across his palm, careful of the ink. He held it like a thing that could bite. "Ashcombe, my lady," he said quietly. "Baronetcy, Northam. Crest. Ash leaf proper above a chevron sable. Extinguished within 20 years. The debts were severe. The properties were sold to a consortium. I have a list of names." She did not look at the list in the garden. She had never liked seeing disaster under sun. "You will take this to the Lord Chamberlain's office," she said, "and say that a woman in service bears this device openly and that she was made public in a foolish game. You will say it looks like presumption, or at least is unseemly. You will stress prudence. You will not say my name." The clerk hesitated for the first time. "My lady, this touches—" "Yes," she said, and let the word cut him off with the sharpness of an ivory paper knife. "It touches everything. That is why we will not pretend it is nothing. Use the phrase household order. Use the phrase in the interest of restraint." Men love phrases. They hide in them. "Go." He went again. She walked once more along the laurel's edge, measuring her steps to the rhythm of a piece of music she didn't like, because it kept her pace steady. Later in the west corridor, he crossed back with his hat in his hands and a different angle to his back. He had been to the Lord Chamberlain. He had been to the private secretary because the Lord Chamberlain is a creature of pathways and did not wish to appear to act behind a royal's shoulder. The web pulled taut. Lady Selwyn breathed in once, the sort of breath that burns in good lungs, and let it go. "Thank you," she said, which was not gratitude so much as routine. "Your ladyship," he said, and vanished into the linen of the house. The prince's private secretary found him in the smaller music room where he had not gone to make music. He had gone to sit with his hands clasped behind his back on a window ledge because it looked like calm and felt like a rope. "There is to be a change this evening," the secretary said. He was a man of polished elbows and good silence. "The Lord Chamberlain proposes a formal dinner in the long gallery." "Proposes," the prince repeated, and let the word amuse both of them. "For what purpose?" "To honor certain guests, and to clarify a matter touching the household's conduct," the secretary said, quoting precisely. "To punish a maid and teach me a lesson without naming either," the prince said. "Good. It would be vulgar to be explicit." The secretary did not smile. "There is also the matter of a device, an ash leaf above a chevron. It has been seen on the person of the maid. It concerns several eyes who remember old accounts." "Old accounts are the only kind that matter here," the prince said. He did not ask how the device had traveled from a maid's throat to eyes that sat at high tables. He knew. It had walked in a glove. He let silence have the room for a count of 8. "We will not rage," he said at last. "We will attend dinner." He softened his voice. "Send a note to the master of the horse. Ask him to put in writing the management of the course. Ask nothing more." "Yes, sir." "And ask the Lord Chamberlain," he added, with a courtesy that could be translated as warning or as grace, "to grant me the minimal kindness of being informed before he calls any name." The secretary bowed, neat and exact. Meetings like this were how a house did not devour itself. By dusk, the house had changed skin. You could hear it in the steps. Ceremony has a different weight. The herald stood at the foot of the great staircase and struck his staff against marble. The sound traveled like a tide up the walls and down the corridors. Even the servants felt it in their bones. That order had been declared. "His lordship announces a change," the herald called, and everything he did with a voice. The informal reception is replaced by a formal dinner in the long gallery, to honor distinguished guests and to clarify a matter touching the household's conduct. Attendance is required. No one mistook what that meant. A formal dinner was a room made into a stage. In the service quarters, footmen polished silver, so fast the air shook with it. The understeward reviewed seating that was not his to review, and then reviewed it again, because it calmed him. 2 pages ran in opposite directions, each carrying the same message, because redundancy has always been the fortress of men terrified of disorder. Eleanor, in the antechamber, placed a dish where it belonged, turned, and heard the staff strike like a judgment. The sound passed through the floorboards and into her feet. She stopped moving long enough to make herself take 1 step, then another. The senior housemaid returned with a small bundle tied in a square of muslin. "Your supper," she said, which meant, "Eat now, there may be no chance later." The kindness scuffed against pride, but Eleanor had learned the price of refusing kindness that was inconvenient to her idea of herself. She ate 2 bites of bread that tasted like nothing and made water taste like iron. A page came with a sealed note. He did not hand it to the supervisor. He held it in both hands for Eleanor to take, as if the angle of delivery were a message. She wiped her fingers on a clean cloth and took it. The seal wore the Lord Chamberlain's device. That did not surprise her. What surprised her was how steady her thumb was when she broke it. "Eleanor," the note said, and then her surname as the house had it, spelled as clerks spell when they cannot be bothered to ask. "You will be in attendance in the lower gallery this evening from the first course until released by the Lord Chamberlain. You will remain available to be called. No law in it. Plenty of command." "Do I dress differently?" she asked the senior housemaid, because questions were better asked than swallowed when they could save you later. "You go as you are," the woman said. "You are not to draw the eye. You will be present. You will say what is asked and nothing else, and you will not tremble." "I do not tremble," Eleanor said. It sounded like a boast. It was a prayer. She tucked the note into her apron pocket with the others. The paper sat against the blue ribbon under her sleeve like 2 kinds of promise. She felt foolish for thinking in that direction and could not stop. "Keep your hands folded," the supervisor said in a low voice. "Men read hands. They think they are reading hearts." "I will be careful," Eleanor said. "As careful as I can." The corridor to the lower gallery made a long, pale line under the last of the day. Candles had been set at intervals. The wax smelled expensive. She walked it with the gait of persons who know they are seen and cannot afford to look like it matters. The lower gallery opened into the air of the long gallery like a held breath. Servants darted with covered dishes. A footman worked out a spot of silver he had missed. The master of the horse crossed at the far end and did not see her, or pretended not to, which was also a kindness. The Lord Chamberlain's clerk stood with a small book and an expression that told her he knew everyone's name and would use it. "Here," he said, placing her in a dark alcove that was not entirely inside and not entirely out. "You will remain within sight." She stood where the clerk had placed her and did not touch the wall with her shoulder for support, because someone would read that as weakness or insolence or anything at all except fatigue. From where she stood she could smell the wax and the starch and the first course turning in its steam, and beneath that, the older smells of wood and rivalry. The high windows caught the last blue of evening. She watched it recede a fraction and understood what that meant, that events would now unroll at the pace of candles and appetite. A last page arrived, breathless with importance, and pressed a small square into her palm. She did not mistake this one. The seal was heavier, the script finer. It told her nothing she did not already know, except in the way a blow feels different when it is named. She lifted the seal to the candlelight and understood with a cold, steady certainty that she would be named before the court tonight. Candles lit the long gallery like a constellation by decree. Polished parquet mirrored flame. Portraits of hunts and treaties gazed down with the same measured indifference they had offered to every scandal for a century. The hum before a formal dinner carried its own grammar. The light scrape of chairs, a note from the ensemble testing the air, the soft friction of silk deciding how to fold itself when history watched. Edward entered late enough to be remarked and early enough to be forgiven. He felt the eyes and let them find no handle. He inclined his head, where it would do the most good and the least damage. He took his place beneath a painting of a stag brought to bay by hounds, a composition in which triumph looked suspiciously like exhaustion. On his right, the heir spoke to a privy councillor about tariffs, as if tariffs could wash a day clean. Farther down, the Lord Chamberlain stood like geometry in human shape. Lady Selwyn, 2 places from the end, breathed as if the entire room were made for her ease. The Master of the Horse sat away from the main table, as custom required for officers when called to explain, his face set to the calm of a man ready to be thorough. Edward let his hands rest exactly as etiquette had taught him, fingers barely intertwined, wrists relaxed. Beyond the pillars that divided the long gallery from its lower companion, a dark alcove held a single figure. She did not move. He found her without meaning to. The tilt of the head he had seen under sun, the stillness that was not submission but balance. The blue ribbon on her wrist had the insolence of a bird that refuses to leave a tree when stones are thrown. A gong kissed the air. Conversation sank a measure. The first course made its procession, stealthy and inevitable, like time. He took a spoonful without tasting it, and set it down untouched. He listened for footsteps he had asked to hear. When they came, the measured approach of the Lord Chamberlain leaving ceremony for function, Edward felt the room contract around its skeleton. "My lords, ladies, and honored guests," the Lord Chamberlain said. His voice held that curious softness that makes people listen harder. "Before we proceed, a brief matter touching the conduct of the household requires remark." Forks stilled. Fans paused mid-sweep. In the lower gallery, Eleanor's profile scarcely turned. Edward let his features remain polite. His throat felt neither tight nor loose. He was not nervous. He knew exactly what he could not do, and exactly what he would do when he must. "This afternoon," the Lord Chamberlain continued, "a diversion on the South Terrace was improvised in which a race was run on gravel not designed for such exertion. It took the form of amusement. It touched on the dignity of this house. To preserve order, we will account for it briefly." He gestured. A corridor in the air opened. The Master of the Horse rose and inclined his head toward the room, then toward Edward. The movement said, "I will be accurate. I will not be your defense. I will not be your accuser. Your office," the Lord Chamberlain said, "oversaw the animals." "Yes, my lord," the Master of the Horse replied. 2 mounts were led out for exercise appropriate to the hour. A course was marked by the senior equerry. The corners were inspected. The physician advised temper. My grooms stood by. At no time were orders given that contravened safety. The mare selected for the servant to sit was of mild disposition and sound feet. When the course proved loose at the U corner, I made note for the future. His diction made even stones sound reasonable. He left out what rooms add as garnish. He did not say the prince had asked. He did not say he had hesitated. He did not say a blue ribbon had become an instrument of fate. "The physician," the Lord Chamberlain said, glancing toward the pale wig and steady mouth. "The check was skillful," the physician admitted, "fortunate that it was taken." The Lord Chamberlain let that settle without asking whose skill had mattered more. "The servant," he said, and allowed the word to rest where a name might have been. "The servant will attend," he announced. Edward watched Eleanor step from shadow into visibility with no drama at all. Her footfall made less sound than the shifting of a lace cuff at the far end of the table. She stopped where she had been told to stop, not quite at center, precisely at the edge of sight. The placement was its own sentence. It said, "Useful to see, improper to elevate." "Your name," the Lord Chamberlain said, permitting ritual. "Eleanor," she answered. The room wanted more. She did not give it. "In service to Her Majesty." Lady Selwyn's fan swept once and closed as if it felt a draught. "You rode this afternoon," the Lord Chamberlain said. "I was told to," Eleanor said. "I obeyed. I kept to the physician's caution. I did not urge beyond the mare's safety." The Master of the Horse inclined his head a fraction. It was not for the Lord Chamberlain. It was for himself. "And you wore," the Lord Chamberlain said, allowing his tone to remain correct, "an object that has caused alarm." Now Lady Selwyn's hand, wearing its perfect glove, lifted with the patience of someone accustomed to being chosen. The Lord Chamberlain nodded. The gesture that followed was small and violent in its implications. She opened her reticule and produced the locket by its edge between two fingers, like a truth held at a distance. "This was not worn openly as a declaration," Lady Selwyn said, almost mild. "It fell. I picked it up to prevent loss. Before returning it, I thought it prudent to remark upon the engraving, which resembles the device of an extinguished house." The locket flashed, a single pulse of light. It drew eyes as surely as any jewel ever worn in that room. Edward felt the pull and resented it. "Describe the device," the Lord Chamberlain instructed, still scrupulous. "An ash leaf above a narrow chevron," Lady Selwyn replied. "Common enough if one is careless, not common if one keeps one's books." A Privy Councillor shifted, the movement of a man recognizing a ledger line in a human shape. "Ashcombe," he murmured to no one. "Northam." The word did not travel far. It didn't need to. It had done its work where it landed. The Lord Chamberlain did not lift his chin so much as sharpen the angle of his neck. "Eleanor," he said, "how came you by this?" "My mother's," she said. "She kept it. She told me to wear it under my kerchief for remembrance. It was not for display. It came free during the ride." "You are certain," the Lord Chamberlain said, "that you did not intend to show it?" "Certain," she said, steady. "Who was your mother?" the councillor asked, curiosity wrapped in caution. "A companion in a house near Northam," Eleanor said. "She served a kinswoman to those of that estate. She did not speak of names the way the court speaks of them. She spoke of promises. They did not hold." There was a small breath drawn several places at once, the sound a fire makes when someone opens a window. Edward felt heat in it. He took a sip of wine and tasted nothing, which told him too much. "The crest," Lady Selwyn said to the Lord Chamberlain, almost gentle, "has not been publicly displayed by any entitled to bear it in 2 decades. Its appearance here, even by accident, invites misreading. We all wish to avoid misreading." Edward looked down the table and saw expressions arrange themselves into the safe shapes required by prudence. The air murmured to the Privy Councillor about something that was not this, which meant it was very much this. The ensemble shifted to another low piece. The wax dripped as if nothing had happened in any century. The Lord Chamberlain had a duty drawn on him like a sword. He would not lay it down because Edward asked him to. He would hold it because the house held him. "You will understand," he said to the room, and to no one in particular, and to the future later, that objects carrying devices of extinguished houses cannot circulate among persons in service without attracting questions that do harm. To the household, to the person, to any involved, unknowingly. He glanced at Edward, a courtesy he bestowed without fear. Edward met his eyes, and with an exactness learned from years of courting the line between idle and insolent, inclined his head to acknowledge both the point and the manner of making it. "Therefore," the Lord Chamberlain continued, "pending review of particulars, household order requires that the person in question be removed from public rooms at once and escorted from the palace at dawn. References will be withheld until antecedents are clarified. Access to the stables is barred. Officers who oversaw the afternoon are exonerated in their execution of duty and will proceed with their posts." It landed like a guillotine lowered without force. No sound, only a different arrangement of air. Edward knew the path if he let himself walk it. Do nothing now. Plead later in cleaner rooms. Pay debts discreetly where law cannot reach. It was the path men take when their skin cannot endure weather. He was wet already. He raised his hand, not to halt, but to mark his presence. "My lord," he said, voice mild enough to remain lawful, "as the person who initiated the hour, I ask that censure fall where it began. You will have no trouble finding my antecedents." A ripple of laughter did not quite happen. The Lord Chamberlain did not permit it. "Your Royal Highness knows," he replied, "that household order is visible order. We address what can be maintained in front of those who must be kept in comfort. I accept your remark as evidence of concern and wisdom. It does not alter my duty." He turned to a captain of guards who had taken his place discreetly at the back. "2 men," he said, without raising his voice. "You will escort the person to the steward's office to await removal at dawn. You will be courteous. You will be seen." The captain bowed. He did not need to look to know who was to be escorted. He had been in the room long enough to learn how to read it. He signaled. 2 guards moved from the periphery with a kind of careful quiet that announces itself more loudly than boots ever can. Eleanor felt them approach before she saw them. The air around her thinned. She fixed her eyes at a point between 2 candle flames and let the world blur into 2 small suns. She had stood for long hours without moving when the Queen slept, and her breath threatened to disturb Lace. She could do it now, for 10 heartbeats, for 12. She did not reach for her throat because reaching would look like pleading. She kept her hands folded as she had been advised, the blue ribbon undercover against her wrist like a temper she would not show. "Eleanor," the Lord Chamberlain said, not unkindly, and the tone of it nearly undid her. "You will walk with these gentlemen to the steward's antechamber. You will remain there until summoned. You will be given water. You will be left in peace." "Do I go alone?" she asked, "because the thing that keeps you whole is to choose words when you have no choices." "You go with them," he said. "No one else." She nodded. She looked down the length of the table once. Not to ask, not to search. To place this room in her mind where it belonged, as a place that turned like a lock around a key she did not possess. She did not expect to find the prince's eyes and found them anyway. The look lasted less than a second, and said things neither could afford to say under ceiling and paint. The first guard touched her elbow. It was meant as permission to be guided. It felt like the beginning of a story she did not want told about her. "You will be gentle," the master of the horse said into the air a little too loudly, as if anyone had planned otherwise. "She has done nothing violent." The guard took his hand away and gestured instead. Eleanor stepped where he indicated, because men with instructions always prefer it when the floor cooperates. The ensemble found a hesitant cadence. A fork touched porcelain and made a single, ringing sound that declared how hard someone had tried to leave no mark. The portrait of the stag looked down upon them all as if congratulating the hounds. Lady Selwyn closed her fan and placed it delicately at the edge of her plate, as if she had just remembered a second course she did not care to eat. The Lord Chamberlain folded his hands and rescued the room with a sentence that restored appetite. "Let us not be colder than the dishes." Eleanor took 1 step into the path the guards made. 1 step carried her out of the alcove's shelter and into the full burn of attention the room had, until then, rationed. She did not stumble. She did not look at anyone. She looked straight ahead, toward a door she had rubbed with beeswax on mornings when no one named her. A chain of breaths drew together like a rope. Edward heard them and felt his own align to theirs and refused to match their pace. Good. Defiance that made no noise was often the only kind allowed. She took a second step. The guard stretched out his hand again, meaning to guide, not to grip. Her sleeve brushed his fingers. The ribbon under it whispered against skin. Edward's chair scraped an inch as he rose without the Lord Chamberlain's leave. Edward rose, and the scrape of his chair cut the music in half. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He placed his hand lightly on the back of the chair, as if to keep it from wandering. "My lord," he said to the Lord Chamberlain, and let the courtesy lead. "For the household's face, allow me to remedy my own indiscretion by seeing to the order of what follows. A moment's pause will prevent talk from outrunning reason. Talk already outran everything in this house." He felt it like weather. He saw the Lord Chamberlain weigh the appeal to order against the insult of interruption. It was a narrow balance, but the path through it had been marked by generations of men who preferred dignity to quarrel. You may proceed a little way, the Lord Chamberlain said at last, each word measured. Visible decorum will be maintained. Edward inclined his head. He had not been granted power. He had been given room to remove the splinters he had driven into the floor. He took it. He looked to the captain of guards. You will escort the servant not to the steward's office directly, but to the antechamber adjoining it. She will be kept there, with water, under watch. You will do nothing that resembles display. The captain bowed, relieved to be told precisely how to be humane. The guards loosened their stance, stepped back a half-pace, and waited for Eleanor to move by her own will. Edward turned his head to the master of the horse, who had not sat. I require your written account of the course and the mare's condition. Send it to the octagon at once. Yes, Your Highness. To his private secretary. Fetch the chaplain and the keeper of the records to the octagon. I request the parish registers for Northam and the household catalogue of arms. Quietly. We will disturb no more plates than necessary. The secretary vanished like ink drawn into blotting paper. Edward looked again at the Lord Chamberlain, offering him the chance to object in the language of raised eyebrows. The Lord Chamberlain inclined his head, admitting the virtue of procedure when it was his hand that turned the key. Eleanor moved then. She did not let the guards take her elbow. She followed their gesture instead, framing obedience as choice. She left the brightness of the long gallery and slipped into the lesser light beyond. A single figure swallowed by linens and stone. Edward watched her disappear and felt the room grow bearable by a degree. It was not mercy, it was management. He sat because to remain standing would be to make drama where he required silence. The ensemble picked up the thread it had dropped. The air resumed the work of pretending to be air. He ate nothing. Eleanor's soles met cooler stone in the passage, and the sound of music dropped behind her like a curtain. The guards walked at an angle that let her go first without feeling chased. It was a courtesy learned by men told to be courteous under lanterns. She could smell beeswax and paper dust, old friends of corridors that store decisions. They passed the steward's door, a familiar oak face she had polished in mornings that asked nothing of her but care. The guards turned her toward the smaller room that served as the steward's antechamber. It was square and clean, with a chair and a table, and nothing that could be mistaken for comfort if you had your dignity with you. The guards took their places outside the threshold, not inside. She noted that, and breathed a fraction easier. A senior housemaid appeared like a person sprung from woodwork. She set a shawl around Eleanor's shoulders with a briskness that made it less like pity. For the draught, she said. You sit if you wish, you stand if you wish. Water will be brought. Thank you, Eleanor said. The words put a hand under her spine. She sat. She stood again. Sitting felt too much like permanence. Standing felt like being counted. She stood. She folded her hands because that was how they had told her hands behaved when they were not needed. Under her sleeve, the ribbon's edge touched skin like a question she could not answer. The Lord Chamberlain's clerk appeared in the doorway, took in the room with an efficient glance, and disappeared again. The slow machine had begun to turn. She did not know whether the machine would roll over her or carry her. In the long gallery, Edward let conversation brush him like harmless insects. He did not swat. He only waited for the right sound, the cadence of his secretary's feet returning with compliance instead of excuses. He did not need to wait long. The man slipped to his side with the air of a shadow informed. Your Highness, the octagon is ready. The master of the horse prepares his statement. The chaplain is found. The keeper comes with the folio you requested. Good, Edward said aloud, for the Lord Chamberlain to hear. To the room at large he said, Forgive me a brief absence. I will return before the second course. Order requires my attendance elsewhere. He left his chair as if rising were nothing more than muscle and habit. The heir's eyes tracked him, narrowed a degree, and returned to tariffs. Lady Selwyn followed him with the casual interest of a person tracing the path of a fly that might land in her wine. He did not give her the satisfaction of looking back. The octagon room took air differently than the galleries. Sound lifted and came back to the ear a moment later. It was a place designed for intersections, of people, of decisions, of light touching 8 planes of wall. The guards outside the antechamber straightened when he approached. He acknowledged them and stepped into the square where Eleanor waited. For a brief second, her eyes met his. Neither gave way. He saw the shawl at her shoulders, the damp mark left by a water glass on the table, the absence at her throat like a space in a sentence. He wanted to apologize and had nothing the language of this house would accept as apology. "You will remain here," he said, voice controlled and plain. "No one will make a spectacle of you. Officials will come. They will ask. They will record. You will answer what is necessary and not one syllable more." "Yes, Your Highness," she said, the formality anchoring her to a floor that felt lately like water. He turned away before kindness could be mistaken for possession. The master of the horse stepped into the octagon with papers in his hand and the comfort of a man doing his work well. "I have written the sequence," he said. "Horses, course, caution. I add here, at the end, that the locket came free after the finish. It did not hang openly before. The mare was steady. The rider obeyed me." "Sign it," Edward said. The master of the horse signed with the economical flourish of a man who has spent his life writing names that attach themselves to 100 small verdicts. "It will stand," he said. "It will," Edward agreed. The chaplain arrived next, his breath even, his eyes busy with memory. He carried a small satchel, which in any other corridor might have held religious comfort, but which here contained knowledge men prefer to count as secular until their blood requires otherwise. "Parish records for Northam will take time to retrieve in full," he said, "but I recall entries from years past. A child baptized in a cottage under the estate's care. The mother's name. A margin note altered in another hand later." "You are certain?" Edward asked, and then softened it. "Enough to say so without shame if it proves different when the book arrives." "I am certain enough to say I have seen erasure," the chaplain replied, "which is itself a kind of record." Edward nodded. "You will say this when asked, and not one word beyond." The keeper of the records followed with a leather folio hugged to his chest like a sleeping thing. He bowed, placed it on the cleared table, and opened it to a page he had marked with a loop of red string. "Baronetcy of Ashcombe," he said, making the name carry without effort. "Arms, ash leaf proper, chevron sable, extinguished. Debts settled by sale to a consortium. Entries marked, here, here, names of purchasers as trustees, connections to households still in service." "Readiness," Edward said, which was thanks-shaped for rooms like this. "You will confirm the device if it is presented." "I will confirm the engraving matches the catalogue," the keeper replied. "I do not read blood." "You read ink," Edward said. "That will do." Footsteps approached that changed air before they made sound. The Lord Chamberlain came into the octagon with the inevitability of a law arriving at the scene it created. He took in everything, papers, persons, posture, and left nothing unread. "Your Royal Highness," he said, a greeting and a reminder. "You have set in motion a private review. It can function barely without tearing the seam of decorum, but we must be brief. The House cannot sustain a bifurcated attention past the second course." "I am finished with drama," Edward said. "I ask only that we avoid error when the room is crowded enough to make error permanent." "That," the Lord Chamberlain said, "is reasonable." Lady Selwyn slipped into the octagon then, as if she had been expected. She had not, and yet she had. She waited at the threshold with an expression of mild interest that did not fool anyone whose salary depended on sensing a storm through a brick wall. "Lady Selwyn," the Lord Chamberlain said, by way of naming the piece already on the board. "My lord," she replied, turning her reticule in her fingers without opening it. "I believe there is an object that belongs on your table rather than in my keeping." She came forward when invited and drew out the locket with care. Up close in this cooler light, the engraving's faintness revealed itself. Not a bold crest shouted from a coach door, but a private mark pressed into silver long ago. The keeper of the records leaned, not too far, never too far, and compared it to the drawing in his book. "It is the same device," he said. "The style differs by hand, but not by meaning." The Lord Chamberlain nodded once and looked to the chaplain. "The registers," he prompted. "Altered marginalia in the year consistent with the age of the person in question," the chaplain said. "Nothing that makes a claim. Enough that a promise may have been made and withdrawn." Edward stood very still. Promises carry different weights in different rooms. In this house, a promise given to a servant is a thing men call kindness until they are asked to honor it under candlelight. The Lord Chamberlain let a quiet gather. It was not uncomfortable. It was the sort a room makes when it has remembered its purpose. "We will not adjudicate a baronetcy that no longer exists," he said. "We will not invent blood. We will correct a public misstep by avoiding a second one. The removal at dawn is suspended pending this review. The person will not be led through rooms like a cautionary tale. She will remain in the antechamber under watch and in comfort. When we have the registers in hand, we will note them. Tonight, we will avoid scandal." He glanced toward Eleanor through the open doorway as if to verify she still existed. She stood where he had left her, the shawl around her shoulders, hands quiet. Her eyes were not dull. They never had been. Edward felt something ease that had sat across his chest since the ribbon broke. It was not victory. It was the chance to choose. "Bring her into the circle," the Lord Chamberlain said to the guard, not as elevation, but as acknowledgement. "She will hear the words that concern her."
"She will correct an error if she hears one." Eleanor stepped into the octagon and felt the geometry of it receive her like a mild trap. She placed herself where told, not at the head of the table, not at the corner, but within the area where lamp and book and silver lay. The locket rested on the wood with its chain coiled like a question mark. Beside it, the blue ribbon, placed there by a hand she had not seen, looked absurd and perfect, like a flower on a ledger.
The master of the horse read his statement. He did not embellish. When he reached the line about the locket coming free after the finish, something in Eleanor's throat softened. The room believed him. The room always believed men who spoke about horses in a certain tone. The keeper of the records repeated his confirmation. The chaplain repeated his memory. Lady Selwyn, asked if she had anything further, said only, "The house is better when it watches itself," which could be read as penitence or pride depending on the ear. The Lord Chamberlain placed his hand flat on the table. "So," he said, concluding a thing without performing it, "we will carry this order back to the long gallery before rumour eats through the tablecloth. At the close of the first course, we will resume ordinary talk. Later, we will announce what we must in a tone that leaves no edges for amateurs to cut themselves upon." His gaze moved from face to face, making certain no one intended to be brave in the wrong direction. He met Edward's eyes last. "Your Royal Highness will return with me," he said. "It will help." "It will," Edward agreed. He looked once at Eleanor and almost said the wrong thing. He settled for the right one, even if it was thin. "You will stay within sight of the attendants here," he said. "You will not be left alone. When called, you will stand with me and hear what is said." "I understand," she answered. It did not sound like gratitude. It sounded like resolve. The Lord Chamberlain signaled, and 2 footmen came silently to adjust the room for a reading that might yet move into a different chamber if grace allowed. More candles were placed on the table. The flame drew the engraving out of the locket as if from water. Wax scent, sharpened, clean, and serious. Chairs were set, not for comfort, but for witness. Lady Selwyn watched the arrangement with an expression that finally flickered. It was not defeat. It was recognition that the day had shifted from card trick to audit. The master of the horse, dismissed to his own sphere, inclined his head to Eleanor as he passed. It was so small that if you blinked you missed it. She did not blink. Edward took his place at the side of the table, not at the head. He did not belong at the head of this. He had forfeited the right earlier with a blue ribbon and a need to be amused. Standing to the side was a penance so slight a conqueror would have laughed at it. It mattered to him anyway. In the corridor beyond, the music lifted in the long gallery, as if to remind these 8 walls that the house had a separate heart that must continue to beat. The Lord Chamberlain adjusted his cuff, as if it were a phrase. "Shall we?" he asked no one, and to everyone. They were ready to return for the octagon held. Eleanor's gaze fell to the objects on a silver oval with a faint leaf, a thin blue ribbon without a meaning until someone gave it one, and she felt the room's temperature change from spectacle to settlement. Review prepared to step from the court. The Lord Chamberlain reached for the door, and the long gallery breathed again. Edward matched his pace. They entered side by side, not as rivals, but as 2 instruments of the same house tuned to different notes. The ensemble softened and then steadied. Candles burnished the air as if a hand had passed across them. Heads turned. The simple act of returning made the room feel safe, or at least well lit. "Forgive the pause," the Lord Chamberlain said, his voice rounding the edges. "We resume." He did not resume. He rethreaded the hour. "Before the second course," he continued, "a clarification. This afternoon's diversion has been weighed briefly in private to spare the appetite of those who prefer their order unruffled. The officers who oversaw the management of the animals are exonerated. The physician's caution was honored. Impropriety lay only in the impulse for spectacle. He let the word rest, the way a judge lays a hand upon a book. It did not belong to anyone's name until someone picked it up. Edward stood. He knew where his place had to be. He kept his hands open. "If spectacle is to be named, let it be mine," he said, light cutting through like a blade. "I called an hour that did not honor the room. Censure belongs there." No one applauded. Good rooms do not clap for a man who answers for himself. They shift a fraction and make space. The Lord Chamberlain inclined his head as if adjusting a lamp. "So noted. As for the person drawn into this, we will not multiply error. The object that troubled us has been identified by the keeper of the records as bearing a device of an extinguished house. The chaplain recalls a parish entry and its erasure. This is not claim to title. It is proof of a promise neglected." A current moved the length of the table and back. It smelled of wax and old paper and relief. "Therefore," he said, and allowed the word to carry its proper weight, "there will be no dismissal. The household is best served when it corrects itself without cruelty. The person will be reassigned from the Queen's apartments to a post of less exposure, and a stipend will be granted from the privy purse in recognition of past service overlooked." He did not stare down scandal. He took the wind out of it and set the cloths back on the table. He gestured, and the master of the horse stood. "You are publicly cleared," the Lord Chamberlain said. "See to your animals." "My lord," the master of the horse replied with a bow that was almost pleasure. Edward felt the room reorder itself around a decision. He looked toward the lower gallery. Eleanor stood in the doorway to the octagon's light, the shawl's edge at her shoulder, hands folded. She had not moved forward uninvited. He felt the pull of decorum upon both of them and chose to carry it rather than tear it. "Bring her into the room," the Lord Chamberlain said to the captain of guards, quiet as courtesy. She came as if stepping through temperature change. The long gallery's brightness took her skin and made it deliberate. She stopped where a servant should stop, not at the center, not at the end. She did not look down. She did not look up too far. She stood in the line of sight he had left for her. "The locket," the Lord Chamberlain said, and lifted it from the table where it had rested. He did not offer it himself. He understood the court's appetite for symbols better than most. He placed it on the table again, within reach of a hand that must be allowed to reach. Eleanor stepped forward a half step and took the chain. It slid over her fingers like a river. She lifted it and fastened the clasp with a surety that made Edward's throat ache. She did not kiss it. She did not make theatre. She returned what was hers to where it belonged and waited for the room to decide what else would be done to her. It did not matter to the court, but it mattered to him that her hands did not shake. "Your Majesty is not present," the Lord Chamberlain said to the heir, acknowledging absence with ritual. "But the house is, and the house will remember itself as humane." It was the most generous sentence a bureaucrat could utter under a painting of dogs. He would have left it there. It would have been enough. Edward felt the edge where restraint becomes cowardice, and chose one thing more. He approached the table not as a prince toward a subject, but as a man toward a wrong he had made public. The blue ribbon lay beside the silver oval, looking absurd and important, that accidental emblem the court had already transmuted into a moral. He lifted it. He could feel the room tighten and then hold. He did not mind being seen when being seen corrected rather than amused. He stood before Eleanor, close enough to let those closest see that his face had learned new meanings for the day, far enough to make no one gasp for the wrong reasons. "Allow me to put away what I set loose," he said, "for her and for everyone, and for himself." She lifted her wrist. He could see the faint mark where fabric had pressed all afternoon. He looped the blue ribbon and tied it with neatness, not ceremony, the way a man ties a glove string before he goes into weather. The knot held. It did not shine. It did not dazzle. It did not claim or purchase. It acknowledged. "Not as prize," he said, so quietly that only the Lord Chamberlain and the closest faces would hear. "As apology." "Accepted," she answered, the syllables steady, the air around them newly breathable. Lady Selwyn watched with the cool smile of a woman who knows the difference between confession and theatre. Her fan remained shut. She seemed to absorb the gesture not as defeat to her vigilance, but as the conclusion her caution had made possible, by pushing the matter into light before it fell into rumour and rot. The Lord Chamberlain nodded at the ribbon as if checking a figure. "Let us dine," he said, as if that had been the point all along. He gave the signal. The ensemble took up a light piece that made people forget they had just watched men and women inhabit their best and worst selves. Conversation rose like steam. Plates moved. The house exhaled. Edward did not sit at once. He felt the minute in his bones, and would not make the mistake of leaving it while it still spoke. "Eleanor," he said, and made it sound like a name, not a station. "You will return to the antechamber until this course concludes. When we are finished with the room, we will finish with the matter." She bowed by a breath and withdrew, the ribbon bright against her sleeve, the silver at her throat a small, sensible weight. She passed Lady Selwyn. For the first time since the garden, their eyes met fully. Lady Selwyn inclined her head a quarter of an inch. It was something like respect. Eleanor stepped into the cooler corridor with a feeling that did not sort itself immediately. It was not triumph. It was not relief pure and simple. It was like stepping onto ground that held and not trusting it yet. The guards stood at their posts and did not pretend to hover. The shawl slid from her shoulders to the chair. She let it. She put one hand flat on the table and felt the grain, and for the first time since the equerry lowered his arm, she permitted herself a full breath. Footsteps passed. Voices filtered from the long gallery like the sea heard through shutters. She did not strain to catch words. She did not care what food had arrived or what anecdote the heir had chosen. She watched the candle burn in the octagon, and thought of mornings when light made things possible, and afternoons when it turned honesty into punishment. The chaplain, crossing with a sheaf of copied entries, paused and looked in. He held the papers like something heavier than they were. "You carry yourself well," he said gently. "I carry what I can," she answered. "Most people drop more," he replied, and went on. She smiled a little at the doorframe. It was a new thing, smiling at wood. It felt like starting over. In the long gallery, Edward allowed a plate to be set and a cup to be refilled. He paid the tax the room required, the exchange of remarks that mean nothing, and harvest something. He let the Privy Councillor repeat a phrase about prudence until it became harmless. He let the heir observe that the house had been spared a vulgarity. He let Lady Selwyn approach no more than courtesy demanded, and decline a syllable less. "You did not overdo it," she said, when they were near enough to make sense of each other without letting everyone read their lips. "There is hope." "You would have told me if I had," Edward said. "You always do." "I correct rooms," she said. "You corrected yourself. It looks better." He did not thank her. She did not require it. They let the conversation drift away like a boat cut from a line. The Lord Chamberlain lifted a hand. He had a talent for ending things as if they had ended themselves. "We are concluded," he said, bread undercutting decree. "Let the room enjoy its peace." Chairs eased back. The ensemble closed with a cadence that sounded like a door made tidy. The procession unwound without ceremony. People who had wondered whether they might have to care now knew they did not, and gratitude made them generous to themselves. Edward left the long gallery by the side passage and walked the corridor that had learned his steps. He did not hurry. He passed a window and let the cooling night brush his hand. He entered the octagon and found it strangely empty, the way a room empties when purpose has left it in good order. The guards nodded. He went into the antechamber. Eleanor stood at the table. She was not restless. She was simply not still. Her hands lay one upon the other, and the blue ribbon sat at her wrist like a small oath. The locket rested against her skin, its presence a new normal. She turned her head at his approach and did not pretend to be surprised. "It is done," he said, "in the sense the house uses the word." "It will tell itself differently in the kitchens," she said. "I can survive both versions." "I misread the day," he said. "I will not ask your forgiveness for that here." "It would be asking you to lend me virtue." "You can ask it of yourself," she replied. "More costly, more useful." He accepted the rebuke like water. He did not try to explain loneliness to a woman who lived in rooms built to ignore her. He did not explain pride to someone who had only the shape of it and not the permission. He kept to what could fit between them without breaking either. "You will be reassigned," he said. "It will be duller and safer. You will hate the dullness." "I will hate that word." "Safety keeps people alive," she said. "Dullness keeps them from being pointed at. If I offer anything beyond what has been said, I purchase you," he said, flat with truth. "You purchase yourself," she said. "If you use the power to move this without moving yourself." He looked at the ribbon. He had tied hundreds of knots in his life. On reins, on sashes, on the strings of packeted letters sent into clouds of diplomatic language. He had never tied one that made his hands feel honest. This one did. "I do not mind being watched," he said softly. "I mind wasting it." "You can use it for something other than your hunger," she said. "I can," he said, "if you would let me try." The guards could not hear the shape of the sentences. They heard low voices and the evenness of the tone, and looked away with the tact of men who must stand in doorways all their lives. "Tonight," Eleanor said, "you have done what could be done without turning me into a rumor. Tomorrow, I will carry water differently, but I will still carry it. That is enough for a night." "And after?" he asked. She considered the word. It had gotten her into trouble before. She took it up anyway, because one must rehearse the future, or it does not arrive. "After," she said, "you will pass me in a corridor and choose not to look through me." "I have never been able to," he said. "Then choose to look as if it costs you," she said, and he understood that she wanted dignity, not display. "I will," he said. The Lord Chamberlain appeared at the doorway, not intruding, not private, simply present. He had the expression of a man whose day had fallen back within the fences he had set for it. "We are concluded," he told the room, using the sentence that calms servants and princes alike. "The person may return to quarters. She will be summoned tomorrow as required." "Thank you," Edward said, and meant it. He looked at Eleanor. When you are sent for, I will be the one who sends. She nodded, the movement small and decisive. She did not call him anything. He did not require a word. They left the antechamber in a quiet trio, then separated without choreography. The Lord Chamberlain returned to his numbers. The guards returned to their posts. Edward stepped through the colonnade and into the night unescorted. He did not need to be guarded from the air. The gardens received him as if nothing had happened there. The path along the balustrade still held the memory of hooves in the faint, battered edge of gravel. The yew arbor smelled of green shadow. He walked with the slower stride of a man who has run and chosen to stop. The stars laid needles into the sky. He felt the night come up from the ground rather than down from above. Footsteps sounded on the flag behind him, small and even. He did not turn. He could feel a person choose the same route for their breath. Eleanor stepped into the strip of moonlight that cut the colonnade. She had not planned to walk here. Her feet had planned it. The air was different beyond candlelight. It made sense of things better. He faced her only when she was near enough to make it a risk, and then only by degrees, as if turning too quickly might make everything scatter. Not too near, not too far. The law between them lay there, warm as a stove, hard as iron. "Thank you," he said, the polite version of something rawer. "For riding well, for standing." "You gave me a course," she said, and let the gift of that sentence be felt. "I rode it." "Tomorrow will be slower," he said. "Better," she said. Wind moved the orange leaves in their glass house. The mare would be in her stall, clean, breathing. The stable lamps threw a sweet light when the doors were open. He could see it without looking. He held out a hand, palm up, not asking for hers, but offering a surface where something could rest. She did not put her hand in it. She laid an invisible weight there, the acknowledgement of a day, the beginning of something that could not be named yet without ruining it. "You will be watched," she said. "If you tie knots like this again, they will call you soft." "I can bear it," he said. "You have borne worse," she answered. He smiled at that, because it was true, and because she had not said it to flatter him. "May I see you to the end of the walk?" he asked, because that was a custom that could be offered without scandal when the hour was late and no one's nerves required performance. "You may walk where you please," she said. "I will walk as well." They moved along the balustrade with nothing dramatic in their posture. A shadow traveled with them. The blue ribbon touched the back of her hand with every step and made a rhythm of its own. The locket sat at her throat, cool, then warm. At the corner where the stones had loosened, he slowed. He bent and pressed his fingertips into the gravel and felt how easily it had betrayed him for boasting. He straightened and wiped the dust on his glove, and did not mind the mark it left, because marks are sometimes the only way to remember a lesson. "You will keep the ribbon," he said. "Yes," she said. "I will carry it where people can see and not understand." "And the locket," he said. "That is mine," she replied, "whether anyone understands or not." He looked at her then with a steadiness that should have felt rude, and did not. "You are not a lesson," he said. "You are a person who rides well." "And stands well," she said. "And stands well," he agreed. They reached the end of the balustrade. There was nowhere else to go without choosing to be foolish. He stopped. She stopped. He wanted to bow, and did not, because bowing would be a small theater for the hedges. He inclined his head, because courtesy is sometimes simply exactness. She touched the ribbon, not as a coquette, but as a woman cataloguing what she had. He watched her do it and felt, for the first time that day, that he had put something right enough to forgive himself for what he had begun. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he answered. "Tomorrow I will be careful." "Tomorrow I will be the same person," she said, and the bravery of it broke him a little and made him whole. They parted with the sounds of a house settling around them. A door closed somewhere with a decent finality. The fountain recommenced its whisper. The stars did what they have always done. He walked back along the colonnade without haste. She turned toward the service wing where duties slept until dawn. Both carried the same small colors, blue at the wrist, silver at the throat. Their meanings revised without being erased, the race's mockery remade into something steadier, a promise chosen rather than a spectacle suffered. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.